everything okay, mi amor?
Yeah, everything's gonna be great.
You better run for your life.
We're going to go ahead and get to my review for Barry Season 4, Episode 5, Tricky Legacies. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, Chad, I have to preference this before I go ahead and get into this review. I will be spoiling some aspects of the previous episode of Episode 4. Okay, because that's the only way I'll be able to really talk about a lot of the things in this episode is by spoiling certain aspects of that previous one. Okay, and a lot changes. In Barry after the events of Episode 4. Okay, so I'm just letting everyone know right now. If you gotta go, if you ever watched the most recent episode of Barry, you've been loving the show like me, like everyone else is. Dip out for 20 or so minutes so you can come back on when I'm doing Jedi Survivor. So I have to, I just want to make sure you guys are all aware. But my friends, for those that don't know, kind of get a general synopsis of this episode. This is 8 years after Barry's escape from prison, and Barry and Sally are raising their son in the Midwest, while Gene Cousineau has seemingly come out of hiding, wanting to tell his story and explain his experiences with Barry Berkman. As I said, chat, just talk about my overall opinions of this show so far, this particular season. I think it's been absolutely, excellent. I love that as the series has evolved, it's been such a, great critique, not only on, Hollywood in general and the minutia of the Hollywood system, but exploring these people, these toxic people, whether they're within it or outside of it. And we've just been following this man, Barry Berkman, who has displayed this, toxic behavior throughout his entire life, and how that has influenced other people around him and made them even worse. And it's just been this fantastic saga, this entire series. And I've loved what they've done in this particular season. A lot of things, we finally see the consequences of Barry's actions and him confronted by his egomania and his self-centeredness and his narcissism, and still not getting it. And many of the characters following suit, many of the characters, you think they've learned their lesson, but they don't. And it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And that's why we've kind of come to, this moment, chat, where now it's 8 years after the events of, Episode 4. And a lot of things have gotten even worse for many of these characters. But getting into the episode itself, although, listen, I'll say at the top, although Henry Winkler's, Gene Cousineau is featured towards the end of this episode, very sad, depressed version of him, it's primarily focused on Barry and Sally's life in the Midwest. They have new names, new aliases, and have, for the most part, cut themselves off from society while trying to raise their son, who I believe his name is John. And I use the word try. It's loosely here, in the loosest sense, since both of them are thoroughly inept and incredibly cruel parents. Barry, what I like about this episode is because we see their parenting styles or lack thereof. In regards to Barry, Barry, he tries to come across as this religious and stern, but seemingly loving father, right? And, though he's thinking he's like living up to this fatherly ideal, he's homeschooling his son because he can't leave the house because he's a wanted man. He's on the FBI's most wanted list. It's no doubt his undeniable egomania, his controlling behavior, and just lack of self-awareness is in every single scene with his son. And that's kind of the most disturbing aspect of it, because now we're seeing these two toxic people, both Barry and Sally, with a child. And you just see how, even when they don't even want to admit it, or they think they're doing the right thing, it's like, wow, you are being so abusive towards this child. And it just made me, like, watch the episode just made me fucking hate them. I was like, oh my God, this kid has to get out of here. Social service needs to get in here now, because what we're seeing, it's just cruel. and it's disgusting, but that's why it works. Like the rules that Barry has set up, like this is crazy. There's so many scenes in which Barry, he's always trying to come across as, the loving dad, that typical 1950s dad trying to teach you like a moral lesson. But because of their situation, Barry and his son and Sally can have more social contact because she needs to earn some money from them. But he basically refuses their son like any normal social contact with anyone from the outside, any other children, Chad. And he feels like, well, I'm just trying to protect my son. Well, really, it's all about protecting him. And it comes out in these really unusual ways where in the episode, John befriends this other kid who initially gets in a fight with, but it's like his only true friend out there named Travis. They get into a fight, but they still, because that's what happens, the kids get into fights with each other, but they make up, very quickly afterwards. And John becomes interested in baseball. And there's like this whole sequence where Barry sees him playing baseball, and then to punish him, he forces him to watch this video of kids playing baseball being horrifically injured, like a girl who was paralyzed from the neck down, or a kid getting hit in the head and having severe mental issues afterwards. And it's so unusual. It's just to scare him so he won't leave Barry. And it's like, wow, it's so disgusting. And again, he passes it off. It's just like, well, I'm just being a good dad. I'm just warning you about the dangers of baseball. It's like, no, you're not. And then there's like other subtle things where, because Barry can't go outside, basically, or like really leave the property, they have to order everything, from like Amazon or stuff. And like the son asks at one point, like, hey, Dad, did you order my comforter? And Barry's like, no, I didn't order the comforter. And it's like, well, Dad, my room is cold. Like his room is cold because the house they live in, which I'll get to the house because it's, oh my God, it's just so barren and just filled with no warmth whatsoever, both figuratively and literally in this case. And then Barry starts going on. He just comes up with this Bible story about Jesus and the fish and how it proliferates, and it applies nothing to what his son is concerned about and wants. And basically he's just like, no, I didn't get you your comforter. It's like, just take my advice and that'll warm you. It's like, what? It's so unusual, but yet he does it with a smile. He does it with saying like, I'm being a good dad because I'm teaching you a lesson. And then the other part of it is like lying to his son constantly about his past, about being a soldier, about being a Marine, and completely changing and warping his backstory so his son views him as the hero. So this individual who knows nothing really of the outside world now is like, he can finally worship me and see me as the good guy, because everyone else in Barry's life that he's been with, no one views him as the good guy anymore. Even though Barry loves to say like, I'm a good person. He's not, but he can live that performance. And it's straight up a performance, Chad. That's what he's always wanted. He's wanted to be an actor. He's wanting to hide who he really is. He's using this performance so his son will just worship him. And you just have no idea. And then Sally, on the other hand, oh my Lord, complete opposite, but just as cruel as Barry. And I had to guess, like the end of episode 4, we're wondering like, what's going on, with Sally. And she's become a wine mom. That's straight up what she is, chat. And she's literally on autopilot 24/7. And the actress Sarah Goldberg, I mean, she's been great throughout this entire show, and she's a lot of great moments, chat. But I think this might be her best performance yet as this character, where she's either drinking. I mean, there's not a single scene when she's not drinking something. There's always a glass of half a glass of wine. There's always open bottles of alcohol around her. There's just it's I think it's in every single shot where she's in. And I'm like, wow. And she's either working her diner job, as a waitress with this whole disguise and this fake Southern accent that she has, or she's just constantly on her computer obsessing over the success of others from her past. Like, that's all she consumes. And and the thing is, she's filled with so much hatred and resentment. And sadly, that carries over to her son, chat. She resents and despises her son so much and is completely uninvolved in his life and wants nothing to do with him. There's like a scene in this where, when you have parents, or when you were a kid and you have a bad dream, and you want to sleep in your parents' bed, you want your parent to comfort you. And so often that's what happens. Some of the parents are like, oh, okay, I'll do it, but it comes from a place of love. Like they're like her whole, the body language that plays out in one scene just shows like she just hates this child, and he has nothing but love for it and misunderstanding of why his mom's acting this way. And it's really sad to see, and it just makes you hate her and Barry so much. She is just filled with so much pent up rage. And we see her constantly doing hurtful, straight up at one point, psychotic things to others. She's effectively become as monstrous as Barry. She's just, her monstrous behavior is just in a different form than Barry's is. And their marriage is now completely loveless. If there ever was any love to begin with, and is just kind of happening out of some weird necessity. It's just really this whole thing. It's just a cocktail of a disaster, for their child's future and their mental and his mental stability. Like Barry thinks he's doing all the best things, but really everything that he's doing is for Barry. It's for himself. And like the fact that he's homeschooling this kid, not having have any social contact, lying to him about the outside world. And just kind of like it's crazy that this kid doesn't have any contact, and the way in which he's like teaching him things, which is in such the laziest way possible, basically watching YouTube videos. It's like, I just never thought that the show would go this way in this direction. And maybe it might be a turnoff for some people, but I really like that, because now we're seeing them sculpt someone in the worst way possible. And that's why I think like the name of this episode is so appropriate. It's called Tricky Legacies. It really is a perfect episode, because it's basically Barry, like, he's focusing on teaching his son history and like learning about George Washington, Abraham Lincoln stuff, which Barry seemingly doesn't know that much about. But then he's like learning more about Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. He's like, oh, they did bad things too. And in a way, he's trying to make it, well, these people are considered great, right? But they did bad things. And therefore, it's like, I've done great things, even though I've done bad things. And so it's like his own excuse to say like, well, these are great men, even though they've done bad things. And so I'm just as great as that they are. All right, I'm gonna teach my son the same way. It's just like, oh my God, this is horrible, and it's disgusting. And on the technical side of things, I want to talk about that. I don't know where they're shooting, but it's at least for the episode itself, it takes place in the Midwest, and they're just this lone house in the middle of nowhere. Like their closest neighbor is a farmer who has hundreds upon hundreds of acres of land. You can barely see his house in the distance. It's just open sky, and it's just this, and like inside the house, it's cold. It's often dark. They don't really use lights. Like I notice when they have dinner, they don't turn the lights on, and it's just relying on the natural lighting, and it's just so depressing when Barry is just fucking and droning on and on and on, trying to make excuses for himself. Sally's just drinking constantly and not even being understandable because she's so drunk. And their son just kind of like looking at both of them and like, I guess this is it. It's crazy. Also, sound design. I've always commented the sound design Barry, especially like in season 3, where in season 3 they have a tiger, but you never see it, but you hear it, and it creates so much tension. I love the sound design in this episode because you just constantly hear the wind outside because there's no trees. There's nothing. At one point, I think Barry talks about trees, and his son goes, oh, could we go see trees, Dad? And he's like, oh, maybe someday. He's like, this kid hasn't seen trees. it's what? But you constantly hear the wind in the background, like they're eating dinner, and it cuts through. It just cuts through the conversation. It just reminds you how hollow everything is. This relationship, this family, and even the wind cuts through that facade so easily. It makes it very depressing. And then even when the kid's in bed cold, because his fucking room is so it doesn't have the proper walling. It's so improperly insulated that the kid's freezing. We cut outside, and it's just as cold in the living room where Barry and Sally are separate chairs. She's drinking, watching something. He's watching something else. It's like, oh my God, it's so depressing. And, and it's mostly focused on that, and it does that quite well. But Barry, and then something else happens, and Barry shows off just clearly how psychotic he actually still is. Hasn't stopped, despite a decade later, basically, since their son's about 8 years old. And the other side of it, and this is very near the end of the episode where we see the reappearance of Gene Cousineau. What they don't worry about, we don't see anything with NoHo Hank. We have no idea what's going on there, especially after the events of last episode with that, which were tragic. But Gene does come back. He seemingly has been gone for 8 years. No one knows where he's been. Has he been a fucking hobo? Has he been living off the land? Did he go to a different country? He looks gaunt. He has a huge beard, Chad. We still don't know what happened to his son. And he now wants to talk. Now, I don't believe him. I feel like he's still going to manipulate and lie like he did throughout the rest of this season so far. But it's like, okay, what's this guy have to say? And then his reappearance sets up something that we're probably going to see for the next 3 episodes. So it was great. It's probably the most different episode of Barry ever. It's not even that funny. It's really not funny at this point. Maybe there's a couple laughs towards the end, one involving Gene. But for the most part, it's just really dark. It's very depressing, and it really just shows how horrible these people are. And we're seeing how they're affecting someone who is so innocent, and they're effectively creating someone who could possibly be even worse than they are, which is terrifying. I thought it was, I don't know what the reactions have been this episode. I know it's the most different, but I loved it. I thought it was great. And, this is not, I'm glad that they're really leaning to the fact that Barry, Sally, Gene, all these people are terrible. They're not good people. All right. And they shouldn't be rewarded for their good behavior. They're not heroes. They're monsters. And I like that a lot. It was a raw episode. It's uncomfortable too, especially when you see this cruelty towards this child. It's just like, oh God, when they think, or at least in the case of Barry, because Sally just doesn't care. She has no love for her son, but Barry, he thinks he's doing the right thing, but he's really not. But in any case, it's still a great episode, chat. Been loving this season. But those are just my thoughts so far. What did you guys think of Barry season 4, episode 5, Tricky Legacies? Very curious. I hope everyone enjoyed the video, and I wanted to take the time to tell you about the movie of the week, a film that I really enjoy and one that I think you will too. This week's movie is the John Wick trilogy. Just in time for the release of John Wick Chapter 4, the trilogy stars Keanu Reeves and follows a legendary hitman who is forced out of retirement to seek revenge against the men who killed his dog, a final gift from his recently deceased wife. If anyone is interested in purchasing this fantastic film series, please make use of the Amazon affiliate link below in the video description. Your purchase of the film not only earns me a helpful commission, but any purchase you may make after clicking the link itself for 24 hours would help earn me additional commissions as well. Doesn't matter if it's a Blu-ray, a video game, a pair of socks, or a washing machine. Everything within 24 hours of that click can really help the channel. So go ahead and check out the film, enjoy browsing, and enjoy shopping.